Happy New Year. Thank you. As Sterling mentioned in his leadership moment this morning, we are in the thick of our search for a new associate minister, and we've received many applications, which is wonderful. But each one is about 20 pages long, and most link to a website, which also contains videos of the candidates preaching. So in the last few days, I'd say I've spent about 20 hours reviewing applications. In times like these, ministers of a certain tenure will sometimes reach back for a best of sermon. I originally preached this one 7 years ago in the old sanctuary. That seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? It was a time when I had been thinking a lot about religious and theological language. It's hard for theological words to keep their luster. Most of them are so old, very old. And their meanings, which reside not in the words themselves, but in the minds of listeners, change and nuance, and sometimes they just go right out of fashion across time. On the other hand, we hear some theological words so often that we might assume, without really thinking, that we know what they mean. We may have already decided how we feel about them, and so maybe we just tune them out. We might reject them altogether, or we might take their meaning for granted without having fully discovered what that might really be. And I don't blame us, because theological words are often used carelessly. Right? Words like prayer, faith, miracle, angel, they lose their power when they get overly narrowly defined and then tossed around in pop culture. If the word angel brings to mind the image of a white-skinned cherub and a harp or a halo, well, that is what I'm talking about. In the Bible, angels are often described as terrifying, but they are never cute. Right? And if putting the words prayer and faith and miracle together reminds you of a religious Hallmark card, then you know just what I mean about popular overuse. So as a result, sometimes people adopt a quick spirituality based on a set of words that actually merit a lifetime's worth of study. Or some people turn away from those words and their possibilities for developing meaning in our lives altogether. And what a shame. The original purpose of all theological words was to articulate something of the depth aspect of being. When I was interning as a hospital chaplain, I explained my role to patients in terms of the part of us that's not made up of parts. The doctors take care of the visible parts, I said, and the chaplains take care of the part of you that is not made up of parts. How's your spirit today? If I was lucky, I'd get to pull up a chair. The original purpose of theological words was to give form to those aspects of life that cannot be treated with a bandage or pointed to or painted on a cave wall or a canvas, except in creative metaphors. And I don't know which theological words came first, God or rebirth, but I know that the more complicated ones, like redemption and salvation, must have come much later. And I know that within each word, there are generations of seeking and naming and meaning-making, with each generation and each concept building on the last to make sense of our human experience. Being a human is hard but good, my friend told me. She was going through a divorce. Being a human is hard but good. That's why I have a job, I told her. You just summed up my vocation in 7 words. Being a human is hard but good. And so we invent miles and miles of words to make sense of it, to try to frame it somehow, to interpret it to ourselves, to comfort ourselves, and to honor all that we see and don't see. And some of the words become worn out and faded, especially theological words. They lose their shine, and some fall out of regular use. But the word grace is different. We speak of grace all the time. We say it at the dinner table. We say that someone has it, that they are graceful. Try hammering that nail with some grace, my son's grandfather told him one time. Even hard work can be graceful. We say that humor is our saving grace. We age gracefully, even if we like to change our hair color. We are gracious. We even name little girls Grace. There are not that many theological words that have turned straight into names, at least not many that have stood the test of time. Grace. We speak of grace often, and we sense that it's important to that depth aspect of being. We sense that it has something to do with what's good about being human when being human is hard. But if you look for a theological definition of it, you'll probably find most explanations kind of vague. A typical roundabout description of grace goes something like this. Justice is getting what we deserve, mercy is not getting what we deserve, and grace is getting what we do not deserve, right? Justice is getting what we deserve, mercy is not getting what we deserve, grace is getting what we do not deserve. In Judaism, God's grace is made visible in creation, and it's exemplified in covenants, and it's the reason God forgives his wayward people time and time again. In Christianity and Islam, God's grace is the way that we get salvation. We repent and accept God into our lives, and because God is gracious, God accepts us in return. Grace in these contexts is some kind of infinite loving kindness and divine forgiveness or mercy. It's boundless love that accepts even the wayward person or the wayward people. That stands in pretty stark contrast to the idea of eternal punishment, which is also a traditional part of Christianity. Our Universalist ancestors reasoned that a God of infinite loving kindness would never want anyone to experience eternal suffering, so they argued that God's grace would eventually save everybody, even the worst of the worst. That kind of undeserved gift was very challenging to their fellow Christians, and we could spend a lot of time picking that apart, deconstructing it, thinking about the rationale, and that would be really interesting. But the old religious idea of grace as mercy or pardon is only one definition of the word. I want to talk about the theological significance of grace's other definitions, like beauty, elegance, and goodwill, and what those have to do with mercy. Furthermore, in our church today, we have a lot of notions about what God is or isn't, or whether God is or isn't, and so a challenge is to articulate what grace might mean apart from its mysterious source. Thomas More recounts a scene from Homer's Iliad, one of the nearly 3,000-year-old stories we've inherited from the ancient Greeks. And in that story, the divine metalsmith, Hephaestus, is approached by the mother of Achilles, a powerful warrior. Achilles' mother wants Hephaestus to make a shield for her son. And so he fashions one, but he doesn't do it quickly, even though she has interrupted his other work. Carefully and precisely, he combines silver, bronze, gold, and tin, and then he takes it further. He turns the shield into a work of art, embossing on it the earth, water, sky, the heavens with the constellations and the sun and the moon, and then, having crafted the universe on the shield, he adds to it cities, marriages, arguments, stories of war, and farming and idyllic pleasures. And he encircles these scenes and the cosmos with a great river. Only then is the shield done. By his side, as he works, is his wife, Charis, whose name means grace. More says, this scene is about the marriage of grace and skill, the inseparability of beauty and hard work. It's about the place of grace in ordinary life. In my research for this sermon, I also came across the writings of a Catholic priest who was encouraging his readers to try to incorporate grace into their daily work, even if they had desk jobs that seemed unrelated to their spirituality. Before you begin your work, he said, make above your computer the sign of the cross, bless it, and say, onward, comrade, let us redeem the world. Grace and work. I love the idea of Hephaestus' work, of the beauty of it, and the way he put that shield in the context of everything else that happens in life, big and small, from an argument to the constellations. If life's beauty is one manifestation of grace, then I think that's because beauty is so closely connected with the sacred and with what's meaningful. Grace is what happens when we discover or we are unexpectedly overcome by what is sacred, meaningful, and beautiful. If you consider all that is wrong with the world, all the suffering available to us, and all that we inflict upon ourselves, and the way we can get lost in it, we can just lose ourselves to meaninglessness and distraction, then you can immediately sense the connection between grace as beauty and grace as mercy, between grace as meaning and grace as salvific or saving. Grace is not literally beauty and meaning and saving. It's the fact that those things are possible, and that occasionally we're open enough and we're paying attention enough for them to touch us like a ray of sunlight through a winter window. To speak of grace is to acknowledge the wonder of the fact that we exist at all, when there were a nearly infinite number of other possibilities in the evolution of those cosmos on that shield, in the combining of people before your people, and then of your parents, and then of the specific genes that make up so much of who you are. There are so many possibilities out of which each one of us was born. And now that we are alive, if we are open to it, we continue to experience grace when the beauty and the meaning and the seriousness and the absurdness and the difficulty of life come together. You're walking across a parking lot, absorbed in the business of your day, with your arms full and worries and your keys dropping and a deadline ahead of you. And you are wondering in the back of your mind how to deal with a difficult person in your life, and you're more than a little irritated that you are putting so much thought into it while the other person behaves thoughtlessly. When you look up and you see the snowy mountains. They have towered over this spot for thousands and thousands of years, while people came and went, lived and died right where you are standing. While people transformed it from sand or soil and plants to pavement and buildings and landscaping. You remember how small you are and how ridiculous it is that these thoughts have become so enormous as to seem to fill up your whole being. You will still have to deal with these things, but they are not as all-consuming now. You'll come at them with a little bit more peace, a little bit more equanimity, a little more perspective. That's a little bit of grace. Or let's say you're sick. Your all-encompassing thoughts and routines have been interrupted not by beauty, but by misfortune. Ahead of you lies uncertainty. You're fearful of physical discomfort, of tests, of being in a hospital, of being away from your regular life, which in hindsight looks deliciously comfortable compared to where you are now. You're afraid of what will happen next and what you would give for one of those regular days with keys dropping and an armful of worries that were more predictable. In the hospital, there's no mountain to draw you out of yourself, and even if there were, maybe this is a time for inner transcendence. Who are you when the things that you thought were you are threatened or stripped away? In walks a nurse who chit-chats as she moves the IV bag around and she notes your vital signs and then sees the look on your face and pauses. Standing at the side of the bed, she touches your hand. She doesn't know you according to who you think you are or thought you were. She just sees you in the moment, right there. You are like her, and she's like you, because either one of you could be the one who's sick in that bed, and she knows that. She sees it and thinks about it every day. So many people come and go from that room. This is a hard thing for you, she says. I'm sorry you're going through this. She brings a warm cloth for your head. She tells you something to make you laugh. And this is like water in the desert, this brief connection and comfort. We exist in relationship to each other. We're made up of more than parts. We also consist of the love we give and receive. That's grace. Last month, in 2018, my daughter Olivia told me a new story that I think is another great example. You want to hear it? Yeah. Olivia's 22. Many of you have heard her sing with the band here at church, including with Tanya. They make some beautiful harmonies. But Olivia has not sung much lately because she's been busy studying to become a nurse. She starts her last semester of nursing school this month. During her training, she has done rotations in a lot of different contexts, like neuro units and mother-baby care. And one day, Olivia was assigned to a nursing home, like an assisted living kind of place. I used to work as a nursing assistant in a place like that, and I remember how fast-paced it was for us workers who were often assigned 8 or more residents to care for all at the same time. And it must be like that at this facility too, because Olivia noticed an elderly woman in a wheelchair in the hallway who kept saying, "Can somebody take me to the dining room?" But the other nurses, who were really, really busy, told Olivia, "Just ignore her. She can take care of herself." And the woman repeated her plea every time they passed her. And in between, Olivia noticed that this woman was humming something. She seemed so lonely. Olivia passed her several times in the next hour or so. She tried to ignore her as instructed, but the woman looked so lonely, and she was still humming. And Olivia wondered what song that was. Finally, when she had a short break, Olivia said, "Screw it." That's a quote, and that's my girl. She couldn't stand to see the woman looking so lonely any longer. So she went over to her and she asked her about the song. The woman could not remember the name of it, but she hummed it a little bit more. Her parents used to sing it to her, she said, back when she was a kid in New York. It brought back such special memories. She could only remember a few of the words, but Olivia Googled them, and she found it. She turned up the volume on her iPhone, pulled up the lyrics, and they belted the whole thing out together.
Give my regards to Broadway, remember me to Herald Square. Tell all the gang at 42nd Street that I will soon be there. Whisper of how I'm yearning to mingle with the old time throng. Give my regards to old Broadway and say that I'll be there ere long.
By the time they finished, the other residents and the rest of the staff had all come out into the hallway with them. The woman was so happy and so thankful. Everybody was crying except for Olivia. I'm almost crying, right? She only finally allowed herself to cry when she got to her car. Frederick Buechner calls grace the muffled presence of the holy. I don't know who in that scene experienced more grace, right? The Olivia, the woman, or the crowd of witnesses. The muffled presence of the holy. What is holy is the invisible world of beauty and meaning and sacredness that dwells within each of us and is a potential in everything around us, and it extends out to the constellations. Sometimes it makes itself visible in the world that we inhabit. Occasionally, it just bursts through, and it reminds us that we are made up of it as much as we are made up of everything else. In the I Ching, says Buechner, the 61st hexagram represents a gentle wind above and a lake below, and it's accompanied by this commentary. The wind blows over the lake and stirs the surface of the water. Thus, visible effects of the invisible manifest themselves. The holy manifests itself in our lives, provoking questions of longing, worry, alienation, and making movements of beauty and meaning and love where there might have just been mere survival. These movements are like water rippling in the wind. In moments of grace, we may not see the holy directly. We might not comprehend the whole ultimate and truth and beauty of the universe, but we are moved if we allow ourselves to be. These movements and even the questions that open us up to them are gifts that it is beyond us to demand for ourselves. We can't earn them in such a way as to be entitled to them. This is what it means to say that grace is an undeserved gift. It doesn't mean that you or I are unworthy of grace, but that we are not entitled. We are free to go about our lives gracelessly if we wish. In the reading this morning, a couple describes the abandoned lot they pass on their way to their favorite restaurant. We can go throughout our lives going by such things without noticing. They can be white noise in the background of our worlds. Or we can pass by abandoned lots, grumbling that somebody should do something about that or feeling some resentment. We can work up anxieties about what kind of trouble is going on in those places. We can be fearful, judgmental. Or we can see it through different eyes as something that might have something to teach us. And approaching real and metaphorical abandoned lots, and as much of life as possible in this way, letting our lives speak to us, we open ourselves up to grace. We might not earn it, but we can be ready for it. We might not learn to love undesirable things, but we might grow from them. And we might discover that beauty and blessing can coexist with pain, and that this can save us from despair. Now, here's the flip side to saying that grace is undeserved. Just as you can't earn it, you cannot be so bad or lost or miserable as to be disqualified from it. You can't be so bad or so lost or so miserable that you are disqualified from grace. Whoever you are, wherever you are in life's journey and your spiritual journey, beauty and meaning and a saving grace are still available to you. There is no place so low that you are out of reach. I know this because the generations that came before us infused this truth into that old theological word. It's by living and dying that one becomes a theologian, said Martin Luther. From the earliest human civilizations, through their traces of art and the words and concepts we inherited from them, we receive that universal truth, that being a human is hard but good, and that beauty, mercy, and love are available to us everywhere if we allow ourselves to recognize and receive them. May that be so in your life and in the lives of your loved ones. Will you join me in our closing hymn? It's number 34, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. Please rise in body or spirit.